It is 4:15 a.m. on March 14th, 2026. The sky over the port of Long Beach, California, is pitch black, and a cold, heavy rain is slicking the cracked asphalt of Pier T. A massive joint DEA and FBI SWAT team is moving on foot, silent except for the crunch of tactical boots and the relentless drumming of rain on steel shipping containers. They are carrying enough firepower to level a small army, but their primary breaching tool tonight is an armored Lenco Bearcat G3. The vehicle weighs over 14,000 pounds. It does not knock. It does not wait. At 4:17 a.m., the Bearcat accelerates and slams its reinforced steel front bumper directly into the rolling steel door of Warehouse 14. The impact is deafening. The metal door crumples inward like tinfoil, exposing a sprawling, brightly lit concrete interior. Flashbang grenades are tossed inside. The blinding white light and concussive thunder shatter the early morning quiet. Agents pour through the breach, their weapon-mounted lights cutting through the thick smoke. "Federal agents, stay down! Do not move!" The commands echo off the high ceilings. 3 suspects drop flat on the floor, hands stretched over their heads. But as the lead agents secure the perimeter and the smoke begins to clear, the true scale of the target comes into focus. This is not a drug stash. There are no bales of cocaine. There are no stacks of vacuum-sealed heroin. Instead, the warehouse is lined with floor-to-ceiling industrial shelving units, holding thousands of unmarked 55-gallon steel drums and heavy-duty woven polypropylene bags. It looks like an ordinary agricultural supply depot. But when agents slice open the first row of bags, they find something that changes the entire scope of the investigation. They find vacuum-sealed bricks of high-denomination American $100 bills. Millions of dollars in cash, hidden inside bags labeled as industrial-grade agricultural fertilizer. By the time the scene is secured at 4:52 a.m., agents have uncovered over $40 million in cold, hard cash hidden among the fake cargo. But the massive pile of money is not the most surprising discovery. The real shock comes from the shipping manifests taped to the drums. The paperwork reveals that these materials are not destined for local distribution. They are part of a highly specialized logistics pipeline, funneling raw materials south to build self-propelled semi-submersible submarines for South American drug cartels. The question is, how did a tactical raid on a suspected drug stash turn into the takedown of a multi-million-dollar naval engineering supply ring? To understand how federal agents ended up at Warehouse 14, you have to go back 14 months. It did not start with a high-speed chase or a wiretap. It started with a single line on a spreadsheet. In January 2025, a senior intelligence analyst for the Drug Enforcement Administration in Arlington, Virginia, was running a routine audit of maritime import records. The analyst was reviewing cargo manifests for shipments entering the United States through the port of Long Beach. The shipment in question was imported by a company called AgroSource Logistics, a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The manifest declared the cargo as 20 metric tons of agricultural fertilizer. But the analyst noticed something, a 12% discrepancy in the declared weight. The bill of lading stated 20,000 kilograms. But the port's certified weighbridge scale logged the incoming container at exactly 17,600 kilograms. That is a difference of 2,400 kilograms. In the world of global shipping, minor weight discrepancies happen every day. Pallets shift, moisture evaporates, scales vary. A 12% variance is often written off as a clerical error. But this analyst did not write it off, because the missing weight was not just a number. It was the exact payload capacity of a standard pallet of high-density polymer resin. This was the tiny anomaly that cracked the case open. The analyst flagged the manifest and pulled the import history for AgroSource Logistics. Over the past 18 months, the shell company had imported 42 separate containers through Long Beach. Every single container showed the exact same 12% weight variance. It was not a clerical error. It was a pattern. Someone was systematically falsifying the weight of the cargo to account for something hidden inside the containers. The analyst forwarded the file to the DEA's Special Operations Division, codenaming the preliminary inquiry Operation Deep Marrow. The working theory was simple. Cartels were using legitimate import fronts to sneak contraband into the United States. But when DEA investigators pulled the backgrounds of the importers and the freight forwarders, they hit a wall. AgroSource Logistics was a phantom. It had no physical headquarters. It had no employees. It was a paper entity designed to move money and goods without leaving a fingerprint. The DEA needed eyes on the ground. They needed to know what was inside those containers, who was picking them up, and where they were going. The case was quietly escalated and presented to the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. Because the shipments were crossing state lines and involved maritime customs, the DEA formally requested the FBI's assistance. By March 2025, the case was officially a joint task force operation. By April 2025, the joint task force was up and running. The FBI assigned a seasoned squad from their Long Beach resident agency. The DEA dedicated 2 undercover operatives from their clandestine laboratory support unit. The first order of business was to catch the cargo moving in real time. They set up a physical surveillance net around Pier T. But the first major obstacle hit them almost immediately. The Port of Long Beach is a sprawling, high-traffic environment. Thousands of trucks move in and out every single day. The surveillance team was burning through their budget, sitting in hot vans for 12-hour shifts, watching containers get loaded onto generic semi-trucks and driven away into the Los Angeles sprawl. For 3 weeks, they followed the AgroSource logistics containers. Every single time, the trucks drove to a distribution center in the Inland Empire, unloaded the bags, and disappeared. The bags were then picked up by independent contractors and scattered to the wind. The surveillance was generating thousands of pages of logs, but zero actionable intelligence. The team was drowning in data. They needed a way to isolate the network from the noise. The solution came from an unexpected place. An FBI technician suggested pulling the electronic toll transponder records from the trucks leaving the port. Instead of following the trucks physically, they tracked the electronic footprint. Within 48 hours, the data revealed that 3 specific trucks were making the exact same loop. They left the port, drove to the Inland Empire, and then continued south to a small industrial park in San Diego. That San Diego address was the breakthrough they needed. I spent hours going through the court transcripts and the surveillance logs from this case, and one detail kept nagging me. The suspects were not acting like typical cartel smugglers. They were acting like corporate logistics executives. They used encrypted spreadsheets. They filed fake environmental compliance reports. They paid commercial insurance premiums on their fake cargo. This was not a street-level gang. This was a Fortune 500 logistics operation built specifically to service the cartels. The San Diego Industrial Park was the hub. It was a sprawling, fortified compound surrounded by 12-foot chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. The task force deployed a covert mobile surveillance unit, parking an unmarked white utility van 3 blocks away. The van was equipped with a long-range acoustic and optical system. Through the chain-link fence, the optics picked up something highly unusual. Workers inside the compound were taking the bags of agricultural fertilizer and transferring the contents into unmarked steel drums. But they were not just repackaging fertilizer. They were mixing it with a specialized, military-grade polymer resin. This resin, when combined with specific hardening agents, creates a highly durable, radar-absorbent composite material. It is the exact same material used by naval engineers to construct the hulls of self-propelled, semi-submersible submarines. The realization shifted the entire focus of the investigation. The cartels were not just smuggling drugs into the United States. They were using the United States as a supply chain to build submarines in South America. The submarines, often referred to as narco-subs, are built deep in the mangrove swamps of Colombia and Ecuador. They are designed to travel thousands of miles up the Pacific coast, carrying up to 10 metric tons of cocaine per voyage. But to build them, the cartels need a massive, steady supply of raw materials that cannot be sourced locally. They need marine-grade epoxy, high-density polymers, waterproof sealants, and specialized propulsion components. And they had found a way to buy these materials legally in the United States, smuggle them out of the country, and ship them south. The task force had their target. But to take it down, they needed to map the entire network. They needed to know who was financing the operation, who was receiving the materials, and how the money was moving. To do that, they needed to get inside. By July 2025, the DEA deployed an undercover operative. The operative was a veteran agent with a background in chemical engineering. He was given a false identity as a freelance logistics broker looking to move industrial materials south of the border. His code name was Echo. The undercover operation was a delicate dance. Echo had to infiltrate the network without triggering their counter-surveillance protocols. He made contact with a mid-level logistics coordinator named Daniel Vargas. Vargas was the linchpin of the San Diego operation. He was smart, cautious, and ruthless. Echo approached Vargas with an offer to move a shipment of industrial-grade epoxy at a fraction of the standard shipping cost. Vargas was interested, but suspicious. He demanded to see Echo's credentials, his client list, and his financial backing. The DEA spent 3 weeks building a flawless backstop for Echo. They created a fake website, fake client references, and even routed fake phone calls through a dummy office in Phoenix, Arizona. Finally, Vargas agreed to a meeting. The meeting took place at a diner in San Ysidro, just 3 miles from the Mexican border. Echo sat across from Vargas and laid out the offer. Vargas listened, drank his coffee, and said nothing for a long time. Then he leaned forward and said, "I don't need a broker. I need a mule." He wanted Echo to personally transport a test shipment of materials across the border. It was a classic trap. If Echo was law enforcement, he would refuse or arrest Vargas on the spot. If he was a real smuggler, he would take the job. The task force had to make a split-second decision. If they refused, the operation was dead. If they accepted, they were putting a federal agent across the border with no diplomatic protection and no backup. They accepted the risk. Echo drove a semi-truck loaded with 2 pallets of the polymer resin across the Otay Mesa port of entry. He was wired with a hidden audio transmitter. The truck was tracked by a covert GPS device hidden in the frame. The tension was suffocating. If the cartel searched the truck and found the wire or the GPS, Echo would not make it back alive. The truck cleared customs without incident. Echo drove to a predetermined drop-off point in Tijuana, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He unloaded the pallets, signed a fake manifest, and drove back across the border. He had passed the test. Over the next 3 months, Echo made 4 more trips across the border. Each trip gave the task force a clearer picture of the supply chain. The materials were being moved from San Diego to Tijuana, then loaded onto fishing vessels and shipped down the Pacific coast to Guatemala. From there, they were trucked overland to the mangrove swamps of the Colombian Pacific coast. But the most critical intelligence came from the wiretaps. In September 2025, the FBI obtained a Title III wiretap on Daniel Vargas's phone. The wiretap revealed that Vargas was not the top of the network. He was reporting to a shadowy figure known only as El Arquitecto. El Arquitecto was the mastermind behind the entire submarine supply ring. He was based in the United States, but his identity was completely unknown. He communicated with Vargas only through encrypted messaging apps and burner phones. The wiretap also revealed the financial scale of the operation. In a single month, Vargas discussed moving over $20 million in laundered funds. The money was being moved through a complex web of shell corporations. The task force identified 12 separate shell companies, all registered in Delaware, Wyoming, Nevada, and Florida. The companies were designed to look like legitimate agricultural and industrial supply firms, but they were all controlled by the same network. The money was flowing in from South America, disguised as payments for agricultural equipment, and then flowing out to the material suppliers in the United States. The operation was laundering hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But as the task force closed in on the financial network, they hit another wall. In November 2025, Vargas suddenly went dark. He stopped using his phone. He stopped meeting with Echo. The task force panicked. Had Vargas been tipped off? Had the operation been compromised? The surveillance team watched the San Diego compound for days. Nothing moved. The gates were locked. The trucks were gone. The task force was on the verge of pulling the plug on the entire operation. But then, an FBI financial analyst noticed something. One of the shell companies, a firm called Pacific Marine Supplies, had just wired $4 million to a real estate holding company in Houston, Texas. The money was used to purchase a commercial property. The property was a massive warehouse on the Houston Ship Channel. Vargas had not been tipped off. He had been relocated. The network was expanding its operations to the Gulf Coast. They were building a second supply hub. The task force had a new target. The discovery of the Houston hub was a game changer. It meant the network was larger and more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. The task force had to pivot. They split their team, sending a contingent of agents to Houston to set up a new surveillance operation. But this expansion brought a new set of problems. The Houston Ship Channel is one of the busiest ports in the world. The volume of cargo moving through the channel is staggering. The surveillance team had to isolate the network's activities from the thousands of legitimate shipments moving through the port every day. They also had to deal with the local climate. The heat and humidity of the Texas Gulf Coast were oppressive. The agents were working 16-hour shifts in unmarked vans, sweating through their clothes, eating cold food, and watching a warehouse that seemed deserted for weeks. The human factor was taking a toll. Agents were exhausted, tempers were flaring, and the chain of command was feeling the pressure. But the break came in January 2026. A truck arrived at the Houston warehouse at 2 a.m. The driver unloaded a pallet of unmarked steel drums. The surveillance team's chemical sniffers detected trace amounts of a specialized marine-grade epoxy. It was the exact same material found in the San Diego compound. The Houston hub was operational. By February 2026, the task force had mapped the entire network. They had identified the key players, the supply routes, the financial shell game, and the end users in South America. They had enough evidence to secure federal indictments. But they were missing one piece of the puzzle: the identity of El Arquitecto. The wiretaps had yielded thousands of hours of conversations, but El Arquitecto was a ghost. He never used a phone. He never sent an email. He communicated only through coded messages handwritten on slips of paper, delivered by couriers. The task force was stuck. They had dismantled the network, but they could not identify the mastermind. Then, an FBI technician made a breakthrough. The technician was analyzing the audio from a wiretap on Vargas's phone. In one conversation, Vargas was heard talking to an associate about a meeting with El Arquitecto. Vargas mentioned that the meeting took place at a restaurant in Los Angeles. He also mentioned that El Arquitecto had paid for the meal with a credit card. The technician ran the restaurant's credit card records for the date of the meeting. There were over 300 transactions that day. But the technician cross-referenced the names on the credit cards with the names of the owners of the 12 shell corporations. One name matched. The credit card belonged to a man named Rafael Mendoza. Mendoza was a naturalized U.S. citizen living in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Newport Beach, California. He was the owner of Pacific Marine Supplies, the shell company that had purchased the Houston warehouse. Rafael Mendoza was El Arquitecto. The identification of Mendoza was the final piece of the puzzle. The task force now had the mastermind, the network, and the evidence. They began planning the takedown. The operation would involve simultaneous raids in Long Beach, San Diego, Houston, and Newport Beach. The raids would be executed by joint SWAT teams from the DEA, FBI, and Homeland Security investigations. The planning took 6 weeks. Every detail was meticulously choreographed. The teams rehearsed the breaches on mock-ups of the target buildings. They coordinated with local police to secure the perimeters. They obtained federal arrest warrants for 42 individuals, including Mendoza, Vargas, and a network of logistics coordinators, truck drivers, and financial brokers. The date was set for March 14th, 2026. The code name for the takedown was Operation Iron Tide. What strikes me about this case is the sheer audacity of the network. They were not hiding in the shadows. They were operating in plain sight, using the legitimate infrastructure of global trade to build a navy for drug cartels. They exploited a simple loophole in the customs system, a 12% weight variance, to move millions of dollars worth of materials and cash right under the noses of federal regulators. This was not a failure of law enforcement. It was a failure of the system itself. The global supply chain is so vast, so complex, and so automated that a determined adversary can hide an entire submarine factory inside it. The most surprising part of this case is not the money. It is not the submarines. It is the fact that the entire thing was uncovered because one analyst noticed a 2,000 kilogram discrepancy on a spreadsheet. If that analyst had taken a longer lunch break or just approved the manifest, the network might still be operating today. Most people assume cartel investigations start with a drug bust or a tip from an informant. But the evidence here tells a different story. It started with math. It started with a spreadsheet. It started with a single person looking at a number and asking, why? Here's the take that will probably get us flack. The customs system is fundamentally broken. We require importers to declare the weight of their cargo, but we do not actually verify it in any meaningful way. The weighbridge scales at our ports are used for calculating shipping fees, not for detecting fraud. If a shipper declares 20,000 kilograms and the scale reads 17,600, nobody cares. The system is designed to collect revenue, not to catch smugglers. And the cartels know this. They exploit the gap between the declared weight and the actual weight to move their contraband. I will say what most will not. The responsibility for this failure is on the customs infrastructure, not just the cartels. The system is practically inviting them to cheat. What do you think? Did the system fail these agents, or was this an inevitable consequence of globalized trade? Is this justice served, or too little too late when the submarines are already in the water? By March 2026, the task force was ready. But 20 minutes before the raids were set to begin, they hit a massive complication. The tactical commander in Houston reported that a group of armed guards had suddenly appeared outside the target warehouse. It was not part of the normal security routine. The fear was immediate. Had the network been tipped off? Was it an ambush? The entire operation hung in the balance. If the guards were cartel lookouts, any breach would result in a firefight. If they were private security hired at the last minute, arresting them would blow the element of surprise for the entire coordinated raid. The task force commander had to make a decision in seconds. He ordered the Houston team to stand down and hold their perimeter. They would not breach the warehouse. Instead, they would wait and watch. For 40 agonizing minutes, the surveillance team watched the guards. They ran their license plates and ran their faces through facial recognition software. The results came back. The guards were not cartel lookouts. They were private security guards hired by a neighboring business. They were just doing their rounds. The network had not been tipped off. The element of surprise was intact. The commander gave the green light. Operation Ironside was a go. At 4:15 a.m. on March 14th, 2026, the raids began. In Long Beach, the Bearcat G3 slammed into Warehouse 14. In San Diego, a joint DEA and FBI SWAT team breached the industrial compound using a battering ram and flashbang grenades. In Houston, agents stormed the warehouse on the ship channel. In Newport Beach, a team of U.S. Marshals surrounded Rafael Mendoza's upscale home. The raids were swift and violent. The suspects were caught completely off guard. In Long Beach, agents found the $40 million in cash hidden in the fertilizer bags. In San Diego, they found thousands of gallons of the polymer resin and marine-grade epoxy. In Houston, they found a fully operational repackaging facility, complete with forklifts, industrial mixers, and a hidden office containing financial records. And in Newport Beach, the marshals found Rafael Mendoza asleep in his bed. He was arrested without incident. The takedown was a massive success. Over the course of the next 48 hours, federal agents arrested 42 individuals across 4 states. They seized $410 million in laundered funds, making it one of the largest cash seizures in DEA history. They also seized 12 shell corporations, dozens of bank accounts, and a fleet of trucks and fishing vessels used to transport the materials. The evidence was overwhelming. The financial records found in the Houston warehouse traced the flow of money from South America to the United States and back again. The wiretaps provided thousands of hours of recorded conversations, detailing every aspect of the operation. The Undercover operation provided first-hand evidence of the smuggling routes and the methods used to avoid detection. The task force had dismantled the entire network, from the mastermind in Newport Beach to the truck drivers in Tijuana. The 42 defendants were indicted on a range of federal charges, including money laundering conspiracy, drug trafficking conspiracy, and violation of the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act. The charges carried a combined maximum sentence of over 400 years in prison. The network was destroyed. The supply chain was severed. The cartels would have to find a new way to build their submarines. The takedown of Operation Ironside was a massive victory for federal law enforcement. It demonstrated the power of interagency cooperation and the importance of meticulous, data-driven investigation. But the victory was bittersweet. The $410 million seized was a drop in the bucket compared to the overall scale of cartel financing. The submarines were already in the water. The materials had already been delivered. The cartels had already built their fleet. The task force had shut down one supply hub, but the demand was still there. And as long as the demand was there, the cartels would find a way to meet it. The 12% weight variance loophole, the exact same loophole that allowed the network to operate for years, is still open today. The customs system has not been fundamentally changed. The weighbridge scales are still used for calculating shipping fees, not for detecting fraud. Any importer in the country can declare a false weight on their manifest and move their cargo through the port without being detected. The only thing standing between the cartels and another supply hub is the vigilance of a single analyst. And that is a fragile defense. There is a piece of this we could not verify on camera. Drop a comment if you have heard about it. Rumors persist of a secondary supply ring operating out of the port of Norfolk, Virginia, using the exact same 12% manifest variance. We track what comes next. Subscribe to the Bureau Files so the next case finds you first. The network is dismantled. The mastermind is in custody. The money is seized. But the loophole remains. How many other legitimate import fronts are currently exploiting the exact same 12% customs weight variance? Loophole right now? The answer is unknown. But the evidence is sitting in a warehouse in Long Beach, hidden inside a bag of agricultural fertilizer. The same bag that started it all. The same bag that ended it. The same bag that could start it all over again.